mother in Northwest Indiana has been convicted and sentenced for the death of a 10-year-old boy in her care. She received the maximum of 6 years in prison.
WGN's Julian Cruz has more from Porter County, Indiana.
It gives us a little closure, but we'll never eat.
Dakota Levi Stevens' relatives after today's emotional sentencing in Valparaiso.
I'm glad we can finally find some peace and closure.
Stevens' loved ones in Porter County Superior Court Number 5 today reading victim impact statements describing the pain of losing the 10-year-old back in.
Every year, an estimated 3.5 million children in the United States experience abuse or neglect. But behind these cold numbers lies a reality far more tragic and personal: the innocent lives lost, the future stolen, and the haunting question, how could this happen? This case isn't just another statistic. It's a story of betrayal, failure, and the ultimate cost of neglect. This is the story of Dakota Stevens, a 10-year-old boy whose life was tragically cut short after being placed in the very system meant to protect him. But what went wrong? Dakota Stevens was just 10 years old. To many, he was an ordinary boy, a child with dreams and hopes for the future. But Dakota's journey wasn't ordinary. His life had already been shaped by hardship before he ever entered the foster care system. Born to parents who struggled with substance abuse, Dakota was removed from their home at a young age. After being placed with relatives for a while, the system ultimately decided he needed to be placed in foster care for his safety. Despite the love and care he may have longed for, Dakota was now a ward of the state, entrusted to a system that promises protection but often fails to deliver. His story was far from the fairy tale of foster care often depicted. He was about to enter a new chapter of his life, but the system, and those entrusted with his safety, would ultimately betray him. Every year, thousands of children are removed from their homes and placed into the foster care system due to abuse, neglect, or parental incapacity. But foster care isn't perfect. In fact, the very system designed to protect these vulnerable children has its own set of problems that can lead to abuse, neglect, and tragedy. The foster care system is meant to give children like Dakota a safe haven, a place where they can grow, heal, and begin anew. But for many, it becomes a revolving door of instability. With over 400,000 children in foster care in the United States today, it's a system strained beyond its limits, and not every child gets the care they need. Foster children often face neglect, multiple placements, and lack of consistent care. Many grow up never feeling like they belong, as they move from one foster home to another, never finding true stability or love. Dakota Stevens was just one of many children who slipped through the cracks. While stories like Dakota's may be all too common, his case stands out not just for the brutality of his death, but for the failures of the system that were supposed to protect him. The case of Dakota Stevens highlights a troubling truth, that the very people entrusted with caring for children can sometimes be the ones who harm them the most. But why did this happen? How is it that a child who had been placed under state care, supposedly safe, ended up in such a tragic situation? This isn't just about one horrific incident, it's about a larger system in crisis. It's about questioning how we as a society can allow children like Dakota to fall through the cracks, unnoticed and unprotected. The death of Dakota Stevens was a tragedy that could have been prevented, had the system done its job, had the people entrusted with his care paid attention. But Dakota's story isn't over yet. Jennifer Wilson seemed like the type of person who might make a good foster parent. She had a home, a steady job, and a willingness to care for children who needed help. She became a foster parent through a system that promises safety and stability for vulnerable children. But what drove Wilson to become a foster mother, and how did she gain the trust of child welfare agencies? Jennifer Lee Wilson, a 48-year-old woman, had been a foster mother to several children over the years. Standing at 4 feet 11 inches and weighing 340 pounds, Wilson's physical presence was imposing. However, it was her actions that would leave an indelible mark on the community. In April 2024, Wilson was entrusted with the care of 10-year-old Dakota Levi Stevens, a boy weighing 91 pounds and standing 4 feet 10 inches tall. The Department of Child Services had placed Dakota in Wilson's care just a month prior, following the death of his father in 2021 and the relinquishment of parental rights by his mother. She is a woman from Indiana and has spent much of her adult life working in a variety of positions, from administrative work to retail jobs, struggling to find stability. She was a woman who seemed to have no history of violent behavior or criminal convictions. Despite this, she chose to become a foster parent, believing that she could provide a safe environment for children who needed it. But how did Jennifer Wilson, someone with no prior history of violence, end up in a position where she would be responsible for the life of a vulnerable child like Dakota Stevens? Wilson's journey to becoming a foster mother was not as thoroughly examined as it should have been. Like many foster parents, she had undergone a standard background check, including a review of her criminal record, which was clean. The system's standard checks, however, failed to scrutinize her emotional well-being or capacity for handling children in emotional distress. Wilson had no prior allegations of abuse, but there were subtle signs that she may not have been the ideal candidate for fostering children. She was known to have a difficult personality, quick to anger and with a tendency to become frustrated when things didn't go her way. These personality traits, while not enough to disqualify her from fostering children, were never fully explored by the agencies that placed children in her home. The emotional and psychological toll of caring for troubled children is immense, and not everyone is suited for it. Wilson's failure to establish a positive relationship with the children in her care was a red flag that would not be properly addressed until it was far too late. While Jennifer had agreed to take in children in need, her inability to manage the pressures of caregiving made her placement of Dakota Stevens a ticking time bomb. Before Dakota's tragic death, Jennifer Wilson had fostered several other children. Some had been placed in her care due to neglect, abuse, or the death of their parents, circumstances similar to Dakota's. As a foster mother, Wilson's role was to provide safety, stability, and care for children who had experienced significant trauma. But even though Wilson had previous foster children, her home was not one where children felt safe. Former foster children in Wilson's care reported signs of mistreatment, but these allegations were often dismissed as misunderstandings or misbehaving children. The problem, however, was much deeper than just disciplinary issues. These children spoke of being punished for minor infractions, and of harsh, often inappropriate forms of discipline. One former foster child, who had been placed with Wilson before Dakota, came forward after hearing about the death. The child recalled being subjected to long periods of isolation as punishment, as well as physical discipline that was far more intense than what was deemed appropriate by the foster care agency. Although the child had reported these incidents to a social worker, the allegations were never taken seriously enough to remove Wilson from the system. The former foster child explained, "There were times when I was just ignored or punished for things that didn't make sense. If I didn't do something right, she would make me sit in a corner for hours, and sometimes, she would just ignore me completely." Other foster children reported similar feelings of neglect. One child had been placed in Wilson's home for a short time before being removed. That child recalled seeing Wilson becoming increasingly frustrated when children did not comply with her rules. The child's account painted a picture of an angry and impatient foster mother who lacked the compassion and understanding needed to care for traumatized children. However, these reports were largely brushed off by the agencies overseeing the placements. Social workers failed to delve deeper into the emotional impact Wilson's behavior was having on the children in her care. As a result, children continued to be placed with her, including Dakota Stevens, who had no idea what horrors lay ahead when he was brought into her home. The Department of Child Services, DCS, was responsible for placing Dakota Stevens in Jennifer Wilson's care. The agency's role was to ensure that children were placed in homes that would offer them the care and stability they needed to thrive. However, as Dakota's tragic death would later reveal, the DCS failed in their duty to protect him. Despite multiple reports of neglect and disciplinary overreach, Wilson's foster care license had remained active. The system, which was supposed to be a safeguard, had been compromised by its inability to address the warning signs. The social workers who visited Wilson's home did not see past the surface and failed to recognize the deeper, more insidious problems that were simmering beneath the surface. The investigation into Dakota's death highlighted the cracks in the foster care system. After the tragic incident, it was revealed that Wilson's home had been visited by caseworkers multiple times, yet they never noted any red flags or raised concerns about the emotional atmosphere in the home. These visits were typically brief, with no deep examination into the day-to-day life of the children in Wilson's care. When Dakota died, a review of Wilson's past placements revealed that multiple children had been removed from her care in the past, but the agency had failed to properly assess why these children had been moved. Instead of closely monitoring Wilson's behavior, the DCS allowed her to continue taking in new children, ultimately leading to Dakota's tragic fate. Had the agency done its job, had they properly investigated past complaints or conducted more thorough assessments, the outcome could have been different. But the reality is that Dakota Stevens was failed by the very system that was supposed to protect him. On April 25, 2024, in Valparaiso, Indiana, Dakota Stevens' life would take a tragic turn. Just 10 years old, weighing only 91 pounds, but those few pounds would become a symbol of the inequality between the vulnerable child and his supposed protector. What caused him to reach this breaking point, and why did the system fail him so tragically? Dakota's cries for help that afternoon were met with silence, not only from the walls of his foster home but from the system meant to protect him. That afternoon, Dakota was already on edge. After enduring the trauma of his father's death and the constant instability in his life, his behavior had become more erratic. Dakota had been living in Jennifer Wilson's home for several months, a foster home that promised safety but would end up being a prison. The tensions in the house had been building for weeks. Jennifer had a temper. She had already shown signs of frustration with Dakota's behavior, but that evening, something snapped. It was supposed to be a routine form of discipline, a way for Wilson to assert control over Dakota, but what happened next would become a nightmare. When Dakota ran to a neighbor's house, seeking refuge from the chaos, was he acting out, or was this his desperate cry for help? Wilson, now frustrated and angered by Dakota's defiance, went to fetch him. She found him on the front lawn, again threatening to run away. Did Wilson understand that these acts were the outward signs of a deeper emotional struggle? Or did she see only a misbehaving child who needed to be disciplined? When they returned to the porch, Wilson's attempt to control Dakota became brutal. She sat on him, near his neck and head, for what felt like a lifetime. Did she truly believe this form of discipline was acceptable? Or was it an outburst of frustration that would ultimately lead to a young life being snuffed out? As Dakota screamed, his cries filled the air. But did anyone hear them? Did the neighbors hear his suffering and simply dismiss it, assuming it was just a regular dispute between a foster parent and her child? How many times have we all turned a blind eye to the suffering of those around us, thinking it's none of our business? Inside the Wilson household, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The air was heavy, weighed down by unspoken frustrations. Jennifer Wilson, sitting on Dakota's small body, may have seen it as a moment of control. But Dakota, struggling beneath her weight, was fighting for his life. The sounds of his strained breaths were muffled, his body's movements growing weaker. Did Wilson ever truly grasp the consequences of her actions in that moment? Could she have known how close he was to death? The world outside seemed unaware of the battle unfolding on that porch. Neighbors who heard the commotion later described it as nothing unusual. But how many cries for help go unheard, brushed off as typical household noise? What would it have taken for someone to step in, someone to notice? How many people in Dakota's life were content to keep their distance, thinking someone else would intervene? technology has its way of revealing truths that are otherwise hidden. In this case, the surveillance footage from the Wilson household would become a pivotal piece of evidence. What did the footage show that had remained invisible to the naked eye? The video began innocuously enough, with Jennifer Wilson guiding Dakota back to the porch after retrieving him from the neighbor's house. But as the video progressed, something chilling began to unfold. For the first 20 seconds, you can see Dakota struggling to break free, his small body bucking underneath Wilson's weight. But the real horror comes next. Was this the moment when Dakota realized he was no longer in control of his own fate? Was there a moment in that footage when he knew that no one was coming to save him? As the footage continued, Wilson shifted her position. She leaned her full weight onto Dakota's midsection, and for several minutes, he lay motionless beneath her. How could she not have realized the gravity of the situation? The video shows Dakota's struggles becoming weaker with each passing second. Was this the point at which he slipped away? How much longer could he have lasted under that weight? By the end of the 6-minute and 48-second segment, Dakota was completely still. No movement, no sounds. It was as if he had simply disappeared into the shadows of the room. What did Jennifer Wilson think at that moment? Did she realize that something was wrong, or did she continue to convince herself that Dakota was just acting out? How much longer would the investigation take before the truth became undeniable? As the investigation progressed, the community, still reeling from the tragedy, began to speak out. But did anyone have the courage to act when they had the chance? Neighbors, who had witnessed the events from afar, offered their testimonies. But were their words enough to change the course of the investigation? One neighbor recalled hearing Dakota's screams but assumed they were part of a typical disciplinary episode. The person, who chose to remain anonymous, said, "We didn't think it was serious. Foster parents have a lot of trouble sometimes." But what if that one moment of concern had led to an intervention? Could it have saved Dakota's life? How many other neighbors, colleagues, or friends have ignored warning signs, thinking it was none of their business? Dakota's biological family, though distant due to the tumult of his past, mourned his loss deeply. They had tried to gain custody of him after the death of his father, but the state had decided otherwise. In interviews, family members expressed their anger and disbelief. "We fought for him, but the system let us down. We thought he was safe." How could this have happened? The investigation uncovered disturbing facts. Dakota had sought adoption by a relative because of his fear of returning to Wilson's home. This revelation raises a troubling question. Why wasn't his fear addressed earlier? Was he just another statistic in a broken system? As the investigation unfolded and more information came to light, one question seemed to linger over it all. How could Dakota Stevens, a young boy with a future ahead of him, have ended up in a situation so dire? Was this the result of a failure by those around him to see the warning signs? Or was this a story of a system that was too broken to protect him? Was Jennifer Wilson simply a frustrated foster mother, or did she cross a line that cannot be undone? And what of the others who were responsible for Dakota's safety? Could they have stopped this tragedy? Would they have acted if they had known how much danger he was in? As the legal process begins and the case goes to trial, the question that remains is, will justice be served for Dakota Stevens? And what will it take for the foster care system to finally be held accountable for its role in this tragedy? The answers may not come easily, but they are ones that must be found. In the wake of Dakota Stevens' untimely death, a meticulous investigation unfolded, revealing a tapestry of evidence that would ultimately lead to Jennifer Wilson's arrest. But as the pieces came together, lingering questions emerged. How did a moment of discipline escalate to such a tragic end? And could the signs of distress have been recognized sooner? Same day, April 25, 2024, authorities responded to a distressing call from Jennifer Wilson's residence in Valparaiso, Indiana. Officers arrived to find 10-year-old Dakota unresponsive, his small frame bearing bruises on his neck and chest. Despite immediate efforts, Dakota was pronounced dead 2 days later. Wilson recounted the events, stating that after retrieving Dakota from a neighbor's house, he exhibited defiant behavior, threatening to run away. In an attempt to restrain him, Wilson claimed she sat on Dakota's midsection for approximately 5 minutes. She later noticed his pale eyelids and initiated CPR while contacting emergency services. Forensic evidence told a grimmer story. An autopsy determined the cause of death as mechanical asphyxia, with contributing factors including organ and soft tissue damage, liver and lung hemorrhaging. The disparity in size between Wilson and Dakota, Wilson weighing 340 pounds to Dakota's 91 pounds, was stark and telling. Further investigation uncovered that Dakota had sought adoption by a neighbor, expressing fear of returning to Wilson's home due to alleged physical discipline. This revelation painted a troubling picture of the environment Dakota endured. Porter County Prosecutor's Office released statements emphasizing the gravity of the situation. The office highlighted the thoroughness of the investigation, which included reviewing surveillance footage, autopsy results, and witness testimonies, leading to the conclusion that Wilson's actions were reckless and resulted in Dakota's death. Detectives involved in the case noted the emotional toll the investigation took on all involved. They expressed regret over missed opportunities to intervene earlier, acknowledging that while protocols were followed, the signs of distress were not adequately addressed. Jennifer Wilson's arrest was not immediate. It wasn't until July 2024, after a license plate reader detected her vehicle in Michigan, that authorities apprehended her. The delay left many wondering, why did it take months to locate a woman living in the same community where the tragedy occurred? Upon her arrest, Wilson's demeanor was a complex mix of remorse and defiance. In court, she pleaded guilty to reckless homicide, expressing deep sorrow for her role in Dakota's death. She addressed the court, stating, "I'm not here expecting forgiveness. If the roles were reversed, I can't say I would be able to forgive the person responsible for the death of my loved one." The sentencing hearing was emotionally charged. Family members of Dakota shared their grief and anger, highlighting the profound loss of a boy who had so much potential. A cousin remarked, "She's taken a big part of us away from us." Neighbors and community members echoed sentiments of disbelief, struggling to reconcile the image of the caring foster mother with the actions that led to Dakota's death. Ultimately, Wilson was sentenced to 6 years in prison, with 1 year suspended to be served on probation. The judge noted the severity of the crime and the need for accountability, but also considered Wilson's lack of prior criminal history and expressions of remorse. While justice was served in the form of a prison sentence, many questions remain unanswered. How did Wilson's perception of discipline become so distorted? Were there systemic failures that allowed Dakota's pleas for help to go unheard? And perhaps most poignantly, could Dakota's life have been saved if those around him had acted differently? As the community seeks healing, these questions serve as a somber reminder of the complexities within the foster care system and the profound responsibility placed on those entrusted with children's lives. The answers may never fully satisfy the yearning for understanding, but they are essential in preventing future tragedies. In the aftermath of Dakota Stevens' tragic death, a profound examination of the foster care system's shortcomings becomes imperative. How did a system designed to protect the vulnerable fail so disastrously? And what measures can be taken to prevent such heart-wrenching outcomes in the future? The foster care system, intended as a sanctuary for children removed from harmful environments, has, in certain instances, perpetuated cycles of abuse and neglect. The case of Dakota Stevens is a poignant testament to these systemic flaws. Inconsistent reporting and accountability. Variations in state definitions and reporting mechanisms for abuse and neglect lead to discrepancies in data and accountability. A study from the University of Illinois highlights challenges in accurately reporting maltreatment within foster care, suggesting that some incidents may be overlooked or misclassified. Overburdened and undertrained personnel. child welfare workers often face caseloads so overwhelming that they cannot provide adequate attention to each case. This strain contributes to missed warning signs and insufficient intervention. Insufficient oversight of foster homes. Not all foster placements undergo rigorous scrutiny. Inadequate background checks and monitoring can result in children being placed in environments where they are at risk of further harm. Racial disparities. Children of color are disproportionately represented in foster care. Despite lower rates of reported abuse within their families, Black children make up a significant portion of the foster care population, indicating potential biases and systemic inequities. Anecdotal evidence of abuse. Reports from various states reveal instances where children in foster care have suffered physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, often due to inadequate supervision and support. These failures beg the question, how many more children must endure such injustices before systemic change is enacted? In response to mounting criticisms and heart-wrenching cases like Dakota's, efforts to reform the foster care system are underway. But are these reforms sufficient? Preventive services. Legislation like the Family First Prevention Services Act aims to provide funding for evidence-based services designed to prevent children from entering foster care in the first place. These services include mental health support, substance abuse treatment, and parenting education. Kinship care prioritization. Placing children with relatives or close family friends, known as kinship care, is gaining emphasis. This approach seeks to provide children with familiar and supportive environments, potentially reducing trauma associated with traditional foster placements. Enhanced training and support for foster parents. Ensuring that foster caregivers receive comprehensive training and ongoing support can lead to better outcomes for children. This includes education on trauma-informed care and access to respite services. Accountability measures. Holding child welfare agencies and workers accountable for their actions is crucial. This involves transparent reporting, regular audits, and a willingness to address systemic shortcomings. Addressing racial disparities. Implementing policies that recognize and combat racial biases within the system is essential. This includes cultural competency training and efforts to recruit and retain foster parents from diverse backgrounds. While these reforms represent steps toward a more just and effective system, the question remains, are they enough to prevent future tragedies? The foster care system stands at a crossroads. The path chosen will determine whether children like Dakota Stevens are protected and nurtured or continue to fall through the cracks of a flawed system. The time for comprehensive, compassionate, and systemic change is now. Will we rise to the challenge? When 10-year-old Dakota Stevens tragically lost his life at the hands of his foster mother, Jennifer Wilson, the world took notice. His story, one of hope, fear, and, ultimately, heartbreak, ignited an outpouring of emotion from all corners of society. The public's response was swift, and its impact, immeasurable. News outlets were quick to amplify the story, capturing the gravity of Dakota's death and the ensuing trial. Local media like NBC Chicago and People magazine detailed the heartbreaking details of Dakota's death, shedding light on the unthinkable betrayal of trust by someone meant to protect him. The nation watched as this tragedy unfolded, each headline a reminder of the gap between a child's trust and the reality of a system that failed him. How could this happen under the watch of the very system meant to keep him safe? But it wasn't just the media that carried Dakota's story forward. Social media platforms became a rallying point. On Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok, thousands of voices echoed the same cry, justice for Dakota. With every post, tweet, and video, people expressed outrage, grief, and a shared responsibility to ensure such a tragedy never happened again. What role does social media play in keeping these important stories alive? Could the collective power of digital voices change the future of child welfare forever? Hashtags like #JusticeForDakota was used to amplify the call for change. Online petitions called for stricter foster care regulations, while TikTok videos mourned his life and condemned the inaction that allowed his suffering to go unnoticed. The digital world became a collective space for healing, outrage, and a demand for action. If we can come together for justice online, can we take that energy to push for meaningful change in real life? Dakota's death, painful and unjust, sparked a conversation that can no longer be ignored. The public's response, amplified by both the media and social platforms, became more than just an outpouring of grief. It became a collective call for change. A movement that no longer allows silence to drown out the cries of children in need. How many more children need to suffer before we truly address the failings in the foster care system? As the community mourns and the world reflects on this tragedy, one question remains: will we allow Dakota's story to fade, or will we fight to make sure his death leads to a safer future for all children? In the quiet town of Port Arthur, Texas, Tempe Sinnett dedicates her life to advocating for children who have known nothing but pain and neglect. As the court program director for the court-appointed Special Advocates, CASA, she oversees cases that often mirror the tragic story of Dakota Stevens, a 10-year-old boy whose life was cut short under the care of his foster mother, Jennifer Wilson. How does a system designed to protect fail so profoundly? And what can be done to prevent such heartbreak in the future? Child psychologists and social workers are the unsung heroes who navigate the murky waters of foster care, striving to heal wounds that run deep. Their insights shed light on systemic failures and offer pathways to reform. Dr. Emily Carter, child psychologist, said that children in foster care often carry invisible scars, traumas that manifest as anxiety, depression, and behavioral issues. The lack of consistent, nurturing relationships can hinder their emotional development, making them vulnerable to further abuse. Research supports Dr. Carter's observations. A study on foster children's mental health found that exposure to abuse and neglect significantly increases the risk of developing mental disorders. These children face a higher prevalence of emotional and behavioral challenges, underscoring the need for specialized care and support. Tempe Sinnett's work with CASA involves not just advocating for children's immediate needs, but also addressing the long-term psychological impacts of their experiences. She emphasizes the importance of resilience building and therapeutic interventions to help these children heal and thrive. Psychological factors may have played a role in this tragedy. Foster parents often face immense stress, dealing with children who have complex trauma histories. A study on foster parents' psychological adjustment found that adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, can influence current parenting stress levels. However, resilience can serve as a protective factor, helping parents manage stress more effectively. Wilson's actions raise critical questions. Was she adequately trained to handle children's behavioral issues? Did she have access to support systems to manage stress? The answers may lie in examining the training and resources provided to foster parents. The foster care system is a complex web of policies, procedures, and human emotions. Understanding its shortcomings requires a multifaceted approach. Dr. Linda Hayes, social worker, said that the system often places children in homes without fully assessing the caregiver's ability to meet their needs. This oversight can lead to mismatches that are detrimental to the child's well-being. A study on child maltreatment in foster care revealed that over-reporting and misreporting are significant issues, leading to inconsistencies in how cases are handled. This variability can result in some incidents being overlooked or misclassified, failing to protect vulnerable children. The path forward requires introspection, education, and unwavering commitment to change. Dr. Emily Carter said that we must implement comprehensive training programs for foster parents, focusing on trauma-informed care and stress management. Providing ongoing support and resources can prevent situations like Dakota's from occurring. Organizations like CASA play a pivotal role in advocating for systemic reforms. By addressing the root causes of abuse and neglect, they strive to create a foster care system that truly serves and protects its children. The story of Dakota Stevens is a heart-wrenching chapter in the ongoing saga of foster care reform. It challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths and inspires us to advocate for change. As we reflect on this tragedy, we must ask ourselves, are we doing enough to protect our most vulnerable? What steps can we take today to ensure a safer, more compassionate tomorrow for all children in care? As investigations continue and reforms are debated, one thing remains certain: the need for change is urgent. Will the lessons learned from Dakota's story lead to a foster care system that truly safeguards its children, or will more lives be lost before meaningful change occurs? As we close the chapter on the tragic story of Dakota Stevens, one thing becomes abundantly clear: his death was not just the result of a single individual's actions, it was the culmination of a series of failures within a system that was meant to protect him. A system that, time and again, ignored the signs and allowed a vulnerable child to slip through the cracks. But as we reflect on the pain of his loss, we must ask ourselves, how can we, as a society, ensure that this never happens again? Dakota Stevens' story is a wake-up call. A reminder that the foster care system, in its current state, is not enough to protect the children who need it most. But there is something we can do about it. Today, we ask you to take a moment and reflect on this case. How can we, as individuals, demand more from the system that was supposed to be Dakota's protector? If you believe that every child deserves safety, stability, and love, then we urge you to advocate for reform. Reach out to local lawmakers, support organizations that work for child protection, and demand that policies be put in place to prevent tragedies like Dakota's. Your voice matters. Together, we can push for a foster care system that truly serves the children who need it most. If you found Dakota's story moving, heartbreaking, or just downright infuriating, we encourage you to engage with this video. Like, share, and comment below with your thoughts. Let's start a conversation about how we can make the system better for those who can't speak for themselves. Together, we can bring about change. While Dakota's case is an extreme example, it is not an isolated one. How many children in foster care are still at risk? How many foster children across the country are living in homes where they are not safe, not cared for, and not protected? The tragic reality is that foster care children are often viewed as a problem to be dealt with, rather than individuals who deserve care, love, and opportunities to heal from their past trauma. We must challenge this perception. Foster children are not a burden, they are young lives in need of a chance to grow, to thrive, and to become the people they were always meant to be. This case forces us to question the very foundation of how we approach child welfare. Are we doing enough to provide proper care for children in need? Are foster parents receiving the training, support, and resources necessary to handle the difficult and often painful responsibilities of caring for children who have been through the worst? As we move forward, it is clear that reforms are not just needed, they are essential. But what exactly does that look like? Can we shift the focus from simply placing children in homes to ensuring those homes are safe, supportive, and loving? Can we create a system that equips foster parents with the tools they need to care for children who have suffered unimaginable trauma? Dakota Stevens' life was stolen too soon, and his story is a stark reminder of the work still to be done. But if his death leads to even a small shift in how we view foster children, if it leads to reform, to better protection, to safer homes, then his life, though short, will not have been in vain. And that, perhaps, is the only hope we can hold on to after such a devastating loss. As we reflect on this story, the question remains, will we act now, or will we wait for the next tragedy to force us to face these uncomfortable truths? The future of foster care is in our hands, and the time to make a change is now. Will we stand by and watch, or will we push for a system that truly protects all children, every one of them? Only time will tell. Thank you for joining us in remembering Dakota Stevens. Please continue to spread his story and be a part of the movement that ensures no child ever has to face such neglect again. Together, we can make a difference. Don't forget to subscribe for more crime stories on child's neglect and abuse. Like and share your thoughts in the comment below. Thank you for watching. Love you all. And stay safe.